Hello, and thank you for attending our presentation, our first publishing project, Lessons Learned About Ourselves and Our Work. Before we begin, we'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Donna Langille, and I am the Community Engagement and Open Education Librarian at the University of British Columbia Okanagan campus. In my role, I support instructors with finding, adapting, and creating open educational resources and engaging in open educational practices.
And my name is Amanda Brobbel. I am the Senior Manager for Writing and Language Learning Services at the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus. In my role, I oversee the training and development of both professional and paraprofessional writing and language learning consultants who support undergraduate and graduate students, postdocs, and faculty in achieving their academic communication goals.
We would also like to take this time to acknowledge and thank the rest of the Institute for Community Engaged Research Press editorial team. Fiona P. McDonald, Director of Press, Joanne Carey, Managing Editor, Renoir Gauvin, Editorial Assistant, Madeline Lee Kai, Editorial Design Assistant, Hannah Paul, Editorial Assistant, and Sandra Fox, Indigenous Editorial Advisor. We would like to situate UBC's two campuses and cities, giving recognition and acknowledgement to the traditional, unceded, and ancestral territories of the Indigenous peoples that our university operates from. The Vancouver or Point Grey campus is situated on the territory of the Musqueam peoples, with many of their local outpost sites also sitting on the lands of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. About 4 hours north by car is our Okanagan campus, based in Kelowna on the lands of the Syilx peoples. When we acknowledge being on the territory of the Syilx peoples, it is rooted in an understanding that we, as both settlers and members of the UBC community, are privileged to be working on territories that are not our own. Throughout our presentation, we will be discussing the ways that this project incorporates Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, as well as our commitments to decolonizing publishing and building and sustaining respectful relationships with the Syilx community. We welcome you to find out what territory you are joining from today, and if you don't happen to know, please consider checking out native-land.ca as a starting point.
What you see on this slide is the manifestation of 6 months of collaboration, research, deliberation, and creativity. This is the landing page of the new ICER Press website that features the dramatic colors of the Okanagan sunsets and geometric shapes that build on the ICER logo designed by Maddie Leckie, a student on the project. As billed, the majority of this talk will be about the lessons that Donna and I learned in summer 2021 while collaborating with the team that developed ICER Press 2.0. But first, I want to share a little background about the press and take a moment to encourage you to visit the site at icerpress.ca that our team worked to reimagine. In brief, the press originated as the Center for Social, Spatial, and Economic Justice in 2008, but changed names in 2015 when the center transitioned to the Institute for Community Engaged Research, or ICER. A driving motivation behind the creation of the CSSEJ Press was to provide a space to disseminate community-engaged scholarship outputs in the most economical and accessible way possible for the communities who had participated in the research as well as the general public. Projects included cultural safety and healthcare, mapping for land claims, and language revitalization, to name a few topics. Through its publications, the press produced materials that could be directly usable by the communities engaged in research. In developing the ICER Press 2.0, our goal was to keep that vision in focus, continue the commitment to social justice, promote the publication of open access scholarship, and increase the accessibility and findability of future materials. We were extremely fortunate to have Dr. Fiona McDonald as the press director. Dr. McDonald possesses a wealth of experience in publishing, design, and collaboration, and she made sure our team meetings helped infuse the press's social justice vision into all aspects of the project at each step of development. A key learning is that she accomplished this by gathering a broad team of students and colleagues from UBCO with widely varying expertise to help establish a solid and sustainable foundation for the press as it moves forward. And so it was important to the director's vision to involve the expertise of the library and writing center on the team from the start, where we were welcomed as equal members, not simply supports for the team. Similarly, the student employees were fully integrated at each step of the process. A key learning from the project is how the Press's director honored the individual students' goals and motivations and gave them leadership for those focus areas. Hannah led on the topic of integrating traditional knowledge in publishing while working collaboratively with our Indigenous Community Liaison Officer. Maddie harnessed her passion for accessibility and played a key role in developing equitable author agreements. Renoir Gauvin took charge of developing evaluation criteria for non-traditional materials to frame the peer review guidelines for multimodal materials. In addition to this care for our areas of strength, the process also honored each member's well-being by being flexible and collaborative. With key deadlines laid out at the start, during the weekly meetings, we would work collaboratively together so that any insights gained from one area could be infused in another. All of our work was shared and feedback was welcomed. As the director often said during the process, many hands make light work. It was very exciting for me to work in this exploratory, collaborative, and supportive environment, as too often my work is focused on the printed word modality. In Writing Center work, we still tend to work one-on-one with someone who is producing a text that is destined for a digital or print publication. While alternative modalities like infographics and video are growing in popularity, I rarely have opportunities to focus on those approaches to academic communication. As a result, it was very eye-opening to develop abstract guidelines that would be appropriate for the full range of modalities and genres that the press will publish moving forward. This exercise has helped me articulate the communicative purpose of an abstract to graduate students more clearly in the workshops that I lead and in my writing consultations. Similarly, the press's emphasis on inclusive bibliography has influenced my conversations and workshops with graduate students about the process of selecting sources to represent a wider range of voices and perspectives, which in some fields is still a relatively new idea. At the very least, my experience with the press has reminded me of how essential it is that I encourage new scholars to consider how they can play a role in shaping their field to be more inclusive through citation. The press's emphasis on accessibility has also reinvigorated my passion for helping new scholars see how exclusionary academic jargon can be, especially when working with communities that have been marginalized or dismissed in higher education. Finally, for me, it was a great pleasure that the work with the press caused me to revisit Dr. Gregory Younging's groundbreaking work, The Elements of Indigenous Style. More often than not, instructors ask me to teach source integration to students with an emphasis on rigidly adhering to a specific style. It was a great joy that Dr. Younging's publishers permitted ICER Press to include some of the principles in the author guidelines. In particular, I appreciated the inclusion of Principle 2, which states, in works by Indigenous authors or with Indigenous content, Indigenous style overrules other styles if they disagree.
As Community Engagement and Open Education Librarian, I was invited to consult on the drafting of the Open Access Statement on the ICER Press website. This work was led by editorial press assistants Hannah and Maddie. These students took the lead on an environmental scan, searching the literature as well as other press's open access statements to inform the draft for this press. It was important that the open access statement and principles respect and acknowledge the diversity of voices and knowledges that make up community-engaged research, including Indigenous knowledges and worldviews. In consultation with Sandra Fox, Indigenous Community Liaison, and Kayla Larson, Indigenous Programs and Services Librarian at Wheewa Library, I learned about how the press can prioritize knowledge equity while ensuring that community protocols regarding Indigenous data and information is respected. One way that the press hopes to achieve this is through the implementation of traditional knowledge, also known as TK, labels to enable community-led labeling of Indigenous knowledges. TK labels originated from Local Contexts, an organization founded by Jane Anderson and Kim Kristen in 2010. These labels communicate which aspects of an object or work can be shared and with whom. Another way that the press is committed to decolonizing publishing practices is by following the principles of OCAP to ensure that the publication of Indigenous knowledge and research adheres to specific community-led guidelines and best practices. This work encouraged me to highlight in my workshops and in my conversations with faculty how Western notions of copyright can be in tension with Indigenous knowledges, and to look to Indigenous-led initiatives such as TK labels as a way to make sure that Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing are prioritized in the open environment. This work also emphasized the need for open access publishing opportunities for community-engaged research, particularly for community and stakeholder-developed outputs, such as white papers, infographics, podcasts, and more. ICER Press is committed to publishing a diversity of works to ensure the inclusion of voices, perspectives, experiences, and formats related to community-engaged research. In regard to publication of non-traditional scholarly outputs, I was also asked with providing options for how the press can make their publications more discoverable, particularly for other academic institutions. This led us to think about how we could mint DOIs to ensure that the publications are identified by services such as Crossref. This then led to discussion with colleagues across both campuses on how we can extend our DOI service to include open access presses and other open educational resources. This work with the press challenged me to think about the ways that the library can support multimodal research. I've noticed more and more graduate students seeking support for non-traditional theses and dissertations. Inspired by my experience working with the press, I developed a digital and multimodal research guide for students, faculty, and community members. The guide provides introductory information on digital exhibits, timelines, and story maps, and will soon be expanded to include podcasting and infographics. ICER Press aligns itself in relation to social justice, decolonization, diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the ways that the press developed its statements and commitments on social justice is through consultation with campus leaders, including Jenica Frisk from the Equity and Inclusion Office and Sandra Fox, Indigenous Community Liaison. These conversations focused on the ways that we can minimize barriers to publishing through equitable practices that center Indigenous knowledges and worldviews, such as implementing OCAP principles, traditional knowledge labels, encouraging inclusive bibliographies, and integrating the elements of Indigenous style by Dr. Gregory Younging. Accessibility is also central to ICER Press and was prioritized throughout the whole process of the redesign, from the creation of the website to the way that publications are made available through their various formats. With all of ICER Press's commitments to social justice, these actions are only the first step in what is an iterative process. Individuals are invited to provide feedback on their experience navigating the website by email or through a contact form. ICER Press is also committed to revisiting its commitments and adapting to community needs if necessary. We recognize that the work of social justice, decolonization, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a list of boxes to be checked. It's a process that involves consultation, community feedback, and learning. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at amanda.brobbel@ubc.ca or donna.langille@ubc.ca.